Hi everyone. This is going to be the historical context notes for realism. And again, looking at the map, we obviously were focusing on European art. And I wanted to just kind of point out that we are seeing even more detailed lines on which countries are what, and how some of the countries are still the same and what's different. So, for example, Poland is part of the Russian Empire. Germany still doesn't quite exist, although this area here will become Germany. Austrian Empire as it's going down into the Ottomans, and then Italy has not yet unified. So this map, though, with all these red dots on here, are all every single one of these areas had a revolution between the years 1848 and 1849, including two in France, one particularly in Paris. That's going to be important for the development of the artists that we're going to talk about. So move on to historical context. So first of all, we're definitely going to see an intensification in social life, in politics, and how the economy transformed. These changes are going to be brought about because of the Industrial Revolution. Train and steamship will facilitate the shipment of raw materials and merchandise. It made passenger travel easier, and that's going to lead to the growth of cities. This population migration to the cities was vast, and we're seeing urbanization happen very quickly. And the cities weren't necessarily ready for that many people to move to them. Industrialists and entrepreneurs had new levels of wealth and prosperity in the system, but conditions for workers were just abysmal. There was no minimum wage, there was no help for people who were sick or hurt on the job. So the workers are really going to suffer, and that's going to lead to Karl Marx and Frederick Engels evaluating the plight of the worker, and they're going to publish the Communist Manifesto in 1848, coinciding with those revolutions. The Socialist Manifesto is going to be it is specifically in response to the hardships faced by the workers in the Industrial Revolution. The Communist Manifesto predicted a violent overthrow of the bourgeoisie, or the upper middle class, by the proletariat, or the working class. They predicted the abolition of private property and a creation of a classless society. In that same year, workers' revolt broke out in more than 10 European cities. Let's see, that leads to some unrest in France in the Revolution of 1848. That's when the July monarchy was overthrown for good by a coalition of socialists, anarchists, and workers. The reason why was due to rising food prices, high unemployment, political disenfranchisement, meaning people aren't voting, and government inaction. And this led to the establishment of the Second Republic, which lasted until 1852, when conflict among reformers led to another uprising in which more than 10,000 of the working poor were killed or injured in the struggle against the new government forces. In the United States, in 1848, there was the Seneca Falls Convention. And this is, for those of you guys who took AP US History, I know you probably learned about the Seneca Falls Convention. But in this same year, women and men, but women like Lucretia Mott and Elizabeth Stanton organized the first women's rights convention in Seneca Falls, New York. In there, they basically drafted their own declaration where they called for equality of women before law, property rights for married women, an acceptance of women into institutions of higher education, and the admission of women into all trades and professions. They also wanted equal pay for equal work, and their main push was suffrage, or the right to vote. And if you notice the year, 1848, and then when the women get the right to vote, 1919, they have a long way to go. And in fact, we still have a long way to go in regards to equal pay for equal work. For Japan, Japan isolated themselves prior to this time period, only trading with the Dutch and China or Korea, but would not trade with Great Britain. They wouldn't trade with France or the United States. And again, this is another U.S. topic, but Commodore Perry is going to bring his naval fleet outside of Japan, and they are going to basically demand that Japan trade with the West. And so with the United States and Russia also will travel there. They're going to create treaties in the mid-19th century that leads to increased communication between Japan and the rest of the world, and then it'll lead to the Meiji Restoration, that's spelled Meiji, that will shortly follow this opening of Japan. With this opening, Japan will industrialize. And again, because they industrialize later, like Germany, they're going to have better options for the machinery, for the transportation systems, for infrastructure, just because it's going to be more technology available to them. The problem with that is that Japan is an island nation like Britain, and they have very limited natural resources as opposed to Great Britain. And so, in order to continue the industrialization, Japan is going to start creating an imperial empire. So, this is going to start as a result of opening up trade with Japan. And the interesting thing about Japan is that the art of Japan is going to diffuse to the West. It's going to be pretty much a very popular thing for the French artists to acquire, because most of the Japanese art are prints, like the woodblock prints from, like the bridge, or I'm sorry, the wave over under Kanagawa by, I'm blanking on who it's by, but you guys know who it is. But those prints are going to have a big impact on the Impressionist, and it was really interesting when I was at Claude Monet's house when I was in Paris last summer. There was he had the wave under Kanagawa, and he had other Japanese prints that were in his house, and so it's clear that there's going to be a clear connection between Japanese art and Impressionist art that we'll cover next time, but it all starts with the opening of Japan. And then with the growth of imperialism, that's just in general for the Europeans, they needed new markets for their products, and they also needed to secure access to cheap raw materials and labor. So the European nations established numerous new colonies by dividing up most of Africa and nearly a third of Asia. Colonial rule frequently suppressed indigenous cultures, also while exploiting colonies for an economic development of the European colonial powers. Just like with Japanese art, French society and really European society also becomes fascinated with African art, particularly the masks that we studied of Africa. And I'll be talking about that in a future screencast when I talk about Picasso. He's very much going to be influenced by the minimalism of the masks, and he's going to be, like, you'll see in one of the pieces how influenced he is by those. Okay, then we have Darwin. Charles Darwin will publish his On the Origin of Species in 1859. And Darwin uses this as more of an ecological um, study, but it's going to turn into this message of survival of the fittest in regards to nature to how that applies to human life. And that's called social Darwinism. And that's really going to impact not just how people feel about the meaning of life, but also religion. His ideas seem to deny divine creation and the existence of God. And some of his more extreme supporters claim that certain people, especially Anglo-Saxon upper class people, were achieving the pinnacle of social evolution, and everyone else who is struggling was simply just not as fit for them as them. So they're obviously the fit, and the poor are the unfit, and this provides justification for allowing poor working conditions for the working class. And not just for the working class, but for the underdeveloped parts of the world or the uncivilized parts of the world. So this social Darwinism is kind of a reversal of Enlightenment ideas, but it becomes very pervasive throughout Europe and the United States. Let's see. Okay, also at the same time, geologists will conclude that the Earth is actually much older than what what the Bible says. And so people who are what we call biblical literalists are going to be very upset about that. Okay, for technological advances, there is the invention of the telegraph, the telephone, and the radio. By the end of the 19th century, electricity powered lighting, motors, trams, and railroads in most European and American cities. There are new developments in chemistry that leads to new products like disinfectants. Also, just chemicals that will help with photographic chemicals. And then also there's the invention of dynamite with explosives. Another technological advance is Louis Pasteur's purification of beverages through heat, called pasteurization. They also create the development of vaccines, the sterilization of realizing that you need to sterilize medical tools, and then antiseptics in medicine will lead to dramatic decrease in mortality rates all over the Western world. And then there's a development of art criticism, and that's done through cheap illustrated newspapers and magazines that will publish art criticism that influenced the reception of the production of art. And this could both make or break an artistic career. Then there's this change in how art is conceptualized and even created. Some become committed to political and social activism in the industrialization and social period and through social unrest. And then others will respond to the way photography transforms our vision and perception. And the question of what is art? Is photography art? Is painting art? How do we define what art is? And so that's going to be a topic of discussion. Okay, so that is historical context on realism. And the next one will be on style and characteristics.